So good evening, everyone. My name is Pamela Dube. I'm the Deputy Vice Chancellor of the University of the Western Cape, responsible for student development and support. Before we get started and we welcome you all formally, I'd like to acknowledge the presence of our Vice Chancellor and Principal, Vice Chancellor Rector, Professor Tyron Pretorius, and also our Dean of Arts and Humanities, Professor Kgalagala. I believe he also has a visitor from the University of KwaZulu-Natal, my alma mater. Professor Zulu, you're very welcome. We also have the Dean of Dentistry. I'm not sure if he's in here, but you're very welcome, Prof. And then to continue, we've got also the Minister of International Relations and Cooperations, Dr. Naledi Pandor. Unfortunately, she couldn't come in person, but there is a video recording that she gladly shared with us to welcome you to South Africa and on our behalf also to the University of the Western Cape. Then we also have Dr. Luanda Parker and his wife, and he's from here he was the head of SARA, the South African Heritage Resources Agency, and I believe also Advocate Lungisa Malchas, who's the CEO, is also here. You're very welcome, ma'am. And we've got Professor Siraj Rasool, that you all know, who's the Director of the African Program in Museum and Heritage Studies. Welcome, Prof. And of course, most importantly, our German partners led by Dr. Andreas Gergen, the General Secretary of the German Federal Ministry of Culture and Media, and in absentia, Dr. Johannes Vogel of the University of the Natural History Museum in Berlin and his team, and the HTW HTW, the Berlin University of Applied Sciences team, I think led by Professor Susan Carmel. And we've got the advisors consultancy team, the Pan-African consultancy team led by Philippa Ebene. And of course the DAAD team from Germany, and I believe also from South Africa are here. And our Goethe Institute, Dr. Franke is leading the DAAD team from Germany. So welcome to you all and to all our UWC partner institutions and honorable representatives of museums and cultural heritage sites that in the Western Cape who are here with us tonight, as well as all our staff and students that are with us, and of course a very special warm greeting to the 55 fellows on the Museums Lab program who are here tonight, those who are still on their way, and those who unfortunately couldn't make it. We are here because of you, and we are really looking forward to the 2 weeks with you. Ladies and gentlemen, it's truly a moment of absolute pleasure for me and a great honor to be able to express these special greetings and warm words of welcome to you all this evening. It's even more gratifying to be in your presence tonight wearing one of my hats, a very important hat as the Deputy Vice Chancellor at the University of the Western Cape. Many of you as partners or even as fellows may have already, may remember me as the member of the organizing team of the Museums Lab partners, also as member of the advisors, and as one of the presenters, in fact, the very first presenter in Module 1 on Entangled Histories and the Future of Cultural Memories, if you recall. So where I introduced the notion of critical diversity literacy. It's indeed even more gratifying to realize that we have achieved the goal as partners of the Museums Lab 2022 in general, and specifically also as advisors who've been instrumental in expanding the program to include this phase that brings the Museums Lab program to Africa. and to the African continent, I must say, because we've always discussed the importance of striking a balance in mutual knowledge exchange and between the role players from across Europe and from across Africa. So South Africa is indeed very privileged to be the first point of entry at this time, and the University of the Western Cape to be part of this partnership and of co-hosting Module 3. So the lineup for this evening, ladies and gentlemen, will not take too much time. We're very mindful of the fact that a number of you have just arrived since yesterday, others today, and that you just need some time, at least here in this space, to regroup a bit in a relaxed atmosphere and to enjoy all that we have on offer for you this evening. So as you will note on the program there, we have the Vice-Chancellor who will make some opening remarks, and then the Minister who will then address us in a video recording. And then we will have Dr. Andreas Gergen, who will also share some brief remarks, and then Dr. Luanda Parker from SARA, who will also welcome you, and then finally Professor Rasool, who will share some insights on the Museums Lab program, Module 3, and then we will conclude with a vote of thanks. So in the interest of time, I will not say much in the way of introducing each speaker, as more information will be available on the website. But starting briefly with Professor Tyron Pretorius, I just would like to highlight the fact that he's the 7th Vice-Chancellor and Principal of the University of the Western Cape. And the university has just celebrated its 60th anniversary 2 years ago, and boasts of having produced more than 10 of the country's public university principals or vice-chancellors and rectors, and Prof. Pretorius is one of them. So as our beloved alumnus, he is now making a difference in the lives of about 24,000 students that the university has. Professor Pretorius, please, over to you.
Thank you, Prof. Dube. If there were any students tonight, I think they would probably not agree with you that we are making a difference. The leading team from the German Federal Foreign Office and the German Federal Ministry for Culture and Media, led by Dr. Andreas Gergen, who is the Director General in the Ministry of Culture and Education, Dr. Johannes Vogel and the team from the Natural History of Berlin, the DART team, including DART Southern Africa. I met with DART two weeks ago, I think, and I reminded them that I was the very first DART recipient at the University of the Western Cape in the late, I'm trying to make myself younger, in the early 80s. And you can see the difference that being a DART scholar has meant in my own life. The Goethe Institute team, the HTW Berlin University of Applied Sciences team, UWC partner institutions and museums in the Western Cape. Some of you that I'm seeing for the first time in person tonight. I've seen some of you on Zoom meetings, so welcome. Colleagues from senior management, the two deans present, Dr. Luanda from the South African Heritage Resources Agency. Who did I leave out? Prof. Siraj Rasool, Director of the African Program in Museum and Heritage Studies, staff and students, and then the fellows from across the African continent in Europe. My note says that there are 56, Prof. Dube, and yours said there's 55. But good evening to you all, and a very, very warm welcome to the University of the Western Cape, to Cape Town, and to South Africa. a city that in many ways reflect the inequalities in our society. I always say Cape Town is very much like Cape Point, where the Atlantic and the Indian Ocean meet, but never mingle. A natural phenomenon where two oceans meet, but they never mingle. I do hope that you will enjoy the exchanges and the learnings over the next few days, but that you will also have time in your visit to Cape Town to see some parts of our city and country for yourself. The Museums Lab 2022 is a significant event for UWC because we at UWC have a long history of commitment to safeguarding the cultural objects entrusted to us. We are also dedicated to forming partnerships with museums and other custodians that benefit research and new knowledge. One of our most important partnerships is, of course, with the Robben Island Museum, which we believe as a university must be preserved so that future generations of scholars, of researchers, and people from the community can benefit from it. I'm really not qualified to speak about museums. I'd rather prefer to analyze heads, because that is my profession. But museums, of course, have an important place in communities and societies. It allows sense-making, it gives us meaning, and it opens us up to different perceptions and attitudes, and even allows us to explore very sensitive issues. Take, for instance, our District 6 Museum here in Cape Town, which attempts to contextualize the forced removal of people from a specific geographical area simply because they were not white. Not only does the museum tell the story of that removal, but it also continuously reminds us of the destruction of the social cohesion and the identity of those who lived there. Many people still feel that the forced removals in District 6 was very much the cause of all the societal ills that we see in the Cape, prevalent in the Cape Flats today. Let me offer another example of the complexity of perceptions and memory in South Africa. Gauteng province has two museums situated within 3 kilometers of each other. One is the Voortrekker Monument, which is a stone edifice built by the Afrikaners to commemorate the Battle of Blood River, where their ancestors fought against the Zulu nation on the 16th of December, 1836. Is that the right date, Prof. Siraj? You're the historian. The other museum within 3 kilometers of the Voortrekker Monument is Freedom Park. Freedom Park was erected as a symbol of reconciliation and unity and pays homage to those who contributed to South African liberation struggle. It has happened that these two diverse monuments have held joint events, but many South Africans are likely to view either monument with very different emotions. One will always remain a symbol of white aggression and white domination, and the other might be rejected by those who still, this day, yearn for the return of apartheid. These are small examples of museums in South Africa, and I'm sure there are other similar examples. For reasons such as these, sense-making and exploring complexities and contradiction, the topic of this module, is essential not only in South Africa but across the world. And the fact that it draws together, now I have 50 African and European fellows and lecturers, speakers and mentors. I'm sure my stats is wrong. There can't be 55 fellows and then 50 African and European fellows and lecturers, speakers, and mentors from African and European arts. Finally, I'd like to leave you with the words of our very own poem, Diana Ferris, who is a UWC colleague. When Sarah Bartman, the remains of Sarah Bartman, the Khoi woman who was taken from South Africa and displayed across Europe in the 19th century as an object of bizarre fascination, when she went to fetch Sarah Bartman, or at least the remains of Sarah Bartman, she wrote, "I've come to wrench you away from the poking eyes of the man-made monster who lives in the dark with his clutches of imperialism, who dissects your body bit by bit, who likens your soul to that of Satan and declares him the ultimate God." I trust you will have a fruitful and memorable experience at UWC and in Cape Town. Thank you.
Thank you very much, VC. The numbers, well, it's 55 and the other one is 100. the one about the variety, the diversity of experts that have been engaging with the Museums Lab fellows. So thank you very much. For a psychologist, you really have dissected and analyzed the reality within which we find ourselves and the histories and memories that we carry. As next, as I mentioned, the minister will not be with us, but because she shares our passion for education, culture, and for this continent of Africa, she has kindly then shared a video with us, a video recorded message. And then just briefly, Minister Pandor, Dr. Pandor, is a South African politician, educator, and academic, serving as the Minister of International Relations and Cooperation since 2019. She has served as a Member of Parliament for the African National Congress, or ANC, since 1994, and has been a member of the National Cabinet since 2004, as a minister in various portfolios and serving under all the presidents since 2004, as Minister of Education, Minister of Science and Technology, Minister of Home Affairs, Minister of Higher Education, Science and Technology, as well as in her current role now as Minister of International Relations and Cooperation. So if we could please have the video recording. Thank you.
Program Director, Professor Tyron Pretorius, Vice Chancellor and Rector of the University of the Western Cape. Dr. Andreas Gergen, Director General of the German Ministry for Culture and Media. Officials from the German Federal Foreign Office, Dr. Johannes Vogel and the team from the Natural Museum History of Berlin, the teams from DAAD, the Goethe Institute, and the HTW Berlin University of Applied Sciences, UWC partner institutions and museums in the Western Cape, staff, students, and guests. Warm greetings to you all. I'd like to extend a warm welcome to the fellows and all role players attending the module of the Museums Lab program, which is hosted for the first time on the African continent, with Cape Town as the chosen city and UWC as the host. The Museums Lab project is an important learning and knowledge exchange program, the first of its kind for African and European museum professionals. The bringing together of skills and competencies from museums, academic and cultural institutions is a very welcome initiative, supported by the German Federal Foreign Office in collaboration with other stakeholders. The program will have tremendous benefit for heritage sites across Africa and Europe. It has the potential to transform not only museums, but to foster societal change by addressing urgent issues of social justice in the heritage and cultural institutions domain. Heritage institutions are a neglected area of development on our continent, as their vital contribution to positive consciousness is not always appreciated by societies faced with the urgency of addressing basic socioeconomic needs. South Africa has been a little more fortunate in having such institutions, but the challenge of their transformation remains an important task for all of us. With respect to the Museums Labs program, we are particularly pleased about the participation of African fellows from across the continent, as we cannot understate the importance of expanding postgraduate research in Africa. I would dearly like to acknowledge the robust efforts of the University of the Western Cape to enhance research productivity in our country and in that university in particular. As a formerly disadvantaged institution, the University of the Western Cape has made a critical contribution to reshaping higher education and is one of our continent's great success stories. The University of the Western Cape has become one of our continent's top research and academic institutions and has achieved a number of notable successes in the humanities and social sciences. I mention these developments not to praise the University of the Western Cape, but to indicate that the correct choice has been made. The Faculty of Arts and Humanities, for example, has continued to reposition itself in respect of partnerships with communities, and the faculty won accolades for Dr. Lorato Mokwena's award-winning documentary work, Broken String, which relates to historical as well as present injustices that the Khoi and San people in South Africa continue to grapple with. Such rich achievement not only demonstrates appreciation and cultivation of scholarship around communities whose human, cultural, and linguistic rights are violated, but they speak truth to power with a view to reshape people's lives. This research-based engagement is the lifeblood of community engagement, an important responsibility of higher education institutions. The university has also emerged as a leader in physical sciences in Africa and has built a world-class research group in square kilometer array astronomy research. The university has also been widely commended for making strides in the area of experimental nuclear physics. The African program in Museum and Heritage Studies, run by the university and the Robben Island Museum, is arguably the most important site of education for South African and other African graduates in curatorship, preservation, and collections management. The university houses some of the most important Robben Island archives. Most graduates from this program have been employed in museums and heritage institutions throughout our continent. With a long history of critical engagement with museums and heritage studies, alumni are shaping key debates as curators and public scholars on the continent of Africa and abroad. The importance of heritage as a knowledge area was recognized decades ago and has contributed immensely to preserving and profiling the content and history of struggle. Museums are a valuable heritage resource and can play a powerful role in education awareness and empowerment. They are part of societies and bear witness to relationships between communities, societies, countries, and continents. As living institutions, museums have a responsibility to learn from history and to actively shape change for individuals, locally and globally. The narratives carried through by museums will have lasting influence on the perspectives of future generations, which is why the interpretation of history needs to be reviewed and improved over time to ensure its inclusivity and accuracy. There have been several welcome developments in museums in Africa recently, in fact, on the institution of museums, including new museums which have been established on African civilization, most recently in Senegal, the Democratic Republic of Congo, the republics of Nigeria and Ghana. Ghana's Pan-African Heritage Museum will open its doors next August, and it is very symbolic that the museum will be an hour's drive from the door of no return at the Cape Coast Castle, from which millions of Africans were forced to leave the continent and forced into slavery. The museum's goal is to curate and tell the story of Africans using African voices, tools, and culture, thereby owning the African narrative. It will serve as a resting place for looted cultural artifacts currently housed in foreign museums, which it is hoped will be returned to Africa. There is a growing acceptance in Europe that items seized from Africa during the colonial era should be returned. There is ongoing research and retrieval work of stolen African artifacts housed in the homes and museums of the former colonial powers. Priceless artifacts taken by Germany from Cameroon, Namibia, and Tanzania during colonial times are set to be returned. In October last year, at Cambridge College, a French museum, and a Scottish university all returned artifacts looted from West Africa. Thousands of works were looted from the historic kingdom of Benin, located in modern-day Nigeria, when the British overran and destroyed much of the city in 1897. The British Museum still boasts Benin bronzes among its collection in London, while others have made their way to collections throughout the world. All this shows there is still a long road ahead to retrieve what historically belongs in Africa. And of course, much consideration has to happen as to how those future empty spaces will be filled in order to continue to tell the African story. As the museum's lab project unfolds, we hope the research collaboration will be implemented with a concrete expression of two critical objectives. Firstly, that the formerly oppressed and marginalized should be reflected in cultural and creative institutions. And here I include women and young people as well. Secondly, museums are about a restoration of dignity, and we need to investigate the harm and dispossession of heritage that many communities in developing countries experienced. Beyond dispossession, there should be actions of restoration, with the marginalized as active companions in the process. Post-apartheid South Africa has made efforts to remedy the past. Hence, we have the Slave Lodge, we have the District 6 Museum, among other museums. But we all acknowledge that we still have much more to do. As you begin your deliberations over the next 11 days on a number of important issues, such as museum transformation, remaking memory, dislocation and heritage, and the shaping of historical narratives, I hope that your conclusions will not only serve to transform our museums and make them more relevant, but also serve the cause of social justice. I'm really grateful that you've allowed me an opportunity to welcome you and share these brief thoughts with you, and I wish you well in the wonderful Museum Lives initiative. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much to Minister Dr. Naledi Pandor for her very inspiring and insightful words. You can see she's got a soft spot also for UWC. Actually, UWC has a history of a number of colleagues who formed part of the first democratic governments of South Africa. A number of colleagues were taken to go and work in government. Unfortunately, I wasn't there at that time, but she happens to be my former boss as well. So it's always wonderful to hear her talk and also to share the passion and the drive that always basically gets us to remember that what we do, we are on a mission to transform. As next, then, we're going to have Dr. Andreas Gergen, who is the Secretary General, and people kept calling him the Director General because that's the equivalent, more or less, here in terms of the roles. But he's a Secretary General of the German Federal Ministry of Culture and Media, and who joined the ministry not so long ago, actually, after serving a while as the head of the Department of Culture and Communication at the German Federal Foreign Office, where the Museums Lab program was first conceptualized. He's a doctor of law, mediator, and trainer in negotiation, and has been leading the German delegation to Nigeria, negotiating the ongoing process for the return of the Benin bronzes that are in the possession of Germany. As many of you would know, 2 priceless bronzes were already returned in July at an agreement signing ceremony where culture ministers of Germany and Nigeria met in Berlin, and a number of you were part of that very important ceremony. Over to you, Dr. Gergen.
Dear WEC, dear Pamela, dear Siraj, what you ignored is that WEC has also trained one of the most promising young ladies running the Museums Lab. Yeah, Miriam is an alumna from UWC, so don't underestimate your merit in bringing progress also to Germany. And a warm applause to your university and all your efforts you have made to build up a new South Africa, a society of humanity, and we will come later on to that topic of humanity, and a land which was called to give hope. Hope for diversity and hope for reconciliation. So we are very glad to be here, and I'm personally honored to speak to you today on behalf of the Minister of Culture. But my first thank you goes after university to that wonderful team who has really made the Museums Lab. It's the advisors, and they are called advisors to remind us that the German society is not as inclusive, not as open, not as diverse as it should be, because we need the advisors because they are not already part of the institutions in Germany. So they have to advise us as a government, as well as the big institutions, as the DAD, the Goethe Institute, even the museums. So a big thank you to the advisors who have worked tremendously since 2 years, and they have changed the program. It wouldn't be what it is actually without them and without the support of Siraj, of Achille Mbembe, of Sulaiman Bashir Diania, and of others who have supported in the background very much to establish this program. It wouldn't be nothing without the big institutions, without the Museum for Natural History. And if you do not see a professor and director of the Museum of Natural History. Well, this is the reason why I invest in you fellows, because the institutions are headed by directors, directors generals, secretary generals, who even sometimes who do not know their function, but they are always there, they oppose, they take the parole, they speak out loudly, but those who drive the program are the N-2, N-3, and that's Miriam and Solveig from the Museum of Natural History, and you are happy, you might consider yourself lucky to pass 2 weeks together with them and not with Johannes. Same counts for the DAD and the Goethe Institute. The most brilliant are here and not in Munich or in Bonn or in Berlin. So thank you for the DAD and the Goethe Institute and for the HTV. Thanks for all we learned from you. And this museum's lab is what you have made and what you make out of it. And you, it's that wonderful group of 5 institutions in Germany together with the partners, but most of all, with you, with the fellows. With the fellows. Without you, it would be a German I don't know what. It would neither be European, neither be African, neither be something new. You have taken about your time. You have left your jobs and your families for a high amount of time. You have invested in an adventure being together with 50 other fellows without knowing what will happen, without knowing what will be the benefit of all of that in the upcoming years. Just by your sense of doing something new, of pioneering new ways how to think a museum and beyond the museum, how to think about a society and the role of cultural institutions in a society. So my deepest gratitude to all of you. We are honored to invest in that program. We are honored by the trust of our European and African partners, and we will continue to grow. We will make it even bigger in the upcoming years, because 55 people may change 100 institutions. But as we all know, because you will change your post in the upcoming 4 years, and that will make you change 100 institutions. I'm bad in math because, yeah. But you know your countries. You know what it takes to change a society and to build up institutions which will not work as institutions have worked in the last 20 years. So we have to grow, and we do it together. Let me just stress one point of the betrayal of humanity coming from European countries. We are always proud of the values of the French Revolution, liberty, equality, and then it comes. The third value was never defined. Is it solidarity? Solidarity might be a bit materialistic. Is it brotherhood, sisterhood? Or do we dare to speak out loudly? No, it's comradeship. It's the call for humanity. It's not how to distribute value. That's a misunderstanding. It's not the same as equality. It's the call for humanity, and we have missed that call. As imperialist, as colonialist countries, we didn't listen to the call of humanity. And all which follows, and which follows is actually the great plague of humanity, the destruction of our earth. This is what is actually colonialism. Not to listen to the call of humanity, which reminds us to be responsible for that earth, to be responsible for nature, to be responsible for life, for human life, for all the living in that world. And this is the real reason why we need more such things than museums labs. And we need perhaps, and this is in brackets, we need to read more Russian writers. One of the hardest critiques of the European colonialism was Tolstoy. When you read Tolstoy about the colonialism of Europe, it reminds you that even in the East of Europe, there were forward thinkers. And there is a challenge to all of us. Will you? Oh, we might discuss about Tolstoy later on. I see some Germans who strongly disagree. We will have an interesting discussion out there. I take it. There's a challenge to all of us. And that is the war in Ukraine. And what South Africa and the African countries will think about it. Is it that we are all democracies, and as democracies, we will find a way how to reunite, non-respecting the challenge? Will we find a way how to live with our contradictions and to consider that as democracies we have to stay together? Or is what happened in African countries, in Asian countries, has that still too much weight? And we all know that Russia, the Soviet Union, has been a necessary challenge over years and years to defend the idea of other possible societies than capitalist societies in some parts of the world. But what happens actually is just a colonialist war of Russia against Ukraine. And my deep belief is that we have to find a way through it and to unite forces between democracies, and to find a way through it, to unite and to say no to the promise of societies, of regimes, which will never respect democracies. And this is part of cultural policies. If we do not sense how others sense their body, sense the world, if we do not feel, if we do not listen to other musics, if we do not hear other stories, if we do not feel, see, and explore what others might bring to us as beauty, we will never be able to talk about or to deal with in politics. So the real politics are aesthetics. The real politics, the reason why a society can deal with differences is because that society has experienced different forms of beauty, has listened to different forms of music, has been attentive to different forms of stories. When a society is considering the room, the space of aesthetics as the real ground for a democratic policy, then we will achieve something. And the Museums Lab might be a lab to explore all those possibilities. Well, let me conclude on one point. Where do we go from here? Well, we have returned the ownership of the Benin bronzes. Last week has signed the agreement between the Berlin museums and Nigeria to return the ownership of all the Berlin objects to Nigeria. The others will follow, and we will go that way. It's just a beginning. It's not more. It's just a beginning to a possible other future, but what that future might bring, that's up to you. That's about those who bear the responsibility to define what is a museum, what is a cultural institution, what is an open space for different aesthetics, and help us in Europe to understand that diversity is the reason for beauty and the reason for progress, and it's not homogeneity. It's not what we tried to define in the beginning of the 19th century. That's a plague for our societies. It's a plague for our European societies. So we need you in order to have an idea how diversity lays the ground for progress and for beauty in a society. And perhaps together we can build a world which will better listen to the call of humanity and will find a new definition for what is comradeship. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Gergen, for that eloquent and thought-provoking contribution. As next, we're going to have Dr. Luanda Parker, who, as you know, is a Cape Town-based architect and urban designer who studied in Berlin and whom the 2022 fellows have met as moderator also in Module 1, and who has taken both the 2021 and 2022 fellows on a guided tour through the South African Embassy in Berlin, a building which he designed with his partners to capture contemporary Africa, indigenous building technologies or knowledge, spatial qualities and culture. He welcomes you this evening, as I mentioned before, as the chair of the South African Heritage Resources Agency. Over to you, Dr. Parker.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Pam, for the introductions. I'm carrying this thing. I must watch my time. Okay. My acknowledgements in terms of protocol, I'm going to break down into three. I'm first going to acknowledge Professor Pretorius, the VC, and representing the university. And I'm going to acknowledge, obviously, Dr. Gergen, representing all the German institutions. And obviously, I have to acknowledge the advisors who have been mentioned here, who are representing the fellows. So that's where my protocol ends. I don't have the names of everybody, and I'm trying to make it easy, and we'll say all protocols observed. That's the way we get out of it in South Africa. So, as has been said, I'm wearing, I don't know how many hats actually. Pam has mentioned that I've been a participant in the Museums Lab 2021-2022, and I am wearing the hat of SARA, the organization I represent today. I'll come back to that. I wear the hat as an architect, as an urban practitioner, a heritage activist in a way, but also an ex-Robben Islander. So all those are kind of the hats I wear. Depending on what I'm saying, I'll kind of navigate between all of them. So insofar as the address is concerned, I'd really like to welcome you on behalf of the South African Heritage Resources Agency, of which I've taken the chair just this year. And our CEO, Advocate Margas, is here, and our CFO, the money man, Mr. Alex Tukwayo, make sure that we say the right things that he can afford. But I want to promise him that partnerships are the thing. So, Mr. CFO, we've got to establish more partnerships so that we can unlock some of the resources that are going to enable us to speak to the ministers. As she says, we invest little in heritage. we need to remind our leaders that it is their responsibility to unlock those resources so that organizations like ours can be able to execute their mandates efficiently and in the service of people. We obviously, as SARA, appreciate very much the partnership that Museums Lab has established with the UWC, which is an institution that we are proud of as South Africans in the heritage space, but also in developing a society that is inclusive and that is free from the chains of colonialism. So on behalf of SARA, I wish to welcome you, and I would like to share some thoughts and some reflections on what we do. Firstly, we should say that despite all the contradictions and contestations about heritage, cultural heritage, and the history of colonialism, we have to accept that heritage is a fundamental aspect of society. I think every person who's spoken here today has mentioned that fact. And it is, in fact, an integral part of our identity. But I think we should be saying our collective identities, because which identity are we talking about? I think there are many. But as a nation, or as nations, we seek to identify that which characterizes us as a people. SARA is a statutory organization established in terms of legislation in South Africa to protect and to coordinate the management of cultural heritage in South Africa. And if we simplify that definition, it basically says that we are mandated by legislation to protect, conserve, and manage the national estate. Now, this is not a small task in the context of South Africa, because as has been said, I think Professor Pretorius, as the VC, has articulated it very well, the contradictions, the complexity of South African society, whereby we have to navigate between what is largely colonial heritage. The work we do as SARA covers about 90% of colonial heritage, just be honest. And only about 10% is about the people and the issues of a marginalized heritage or cultural heritage. How do we elevate that? How do we change that balance to make sure that our heritage actually speaks to the experiences and the wishes of our people? So in essence, the tension between the past and the present is made apparent in some of the public contestations that we come across as we identify monuments, as we declare sites as heritage sites. There's a lot of contestation. And we saw this with the university's students calling for the fall of John Rhodes or fall of Rhodes statues in Cape Town and around. And also currently, there's a call for removal of Louis Botha in front of Parliament. He's still standing there on a horse 30 years down the line. We're still dealing with those realities, and that contestation will continue until we can speak about the heritage of our people. Now, we also have to talk, and I think Dr. Gergen and I think some of the initial discussions about the repatriation of stolen artifacts. Our work as SARA has to relate to those discussions, even if it's not our direct mandate. We're not mandated to do so, but we realize that we've got to be part of that international dialogue because it's not far from us. SARA has been called upon just recently to intervene when some of the memorabilia associated with former President Nelson Mandela were being auctioned in New York. SARA came and through legal efforts and everything, intervened to stop that auction of memorabilia that is in 2022, not being stolen or looted, but being taken out to be auctioned somewhere else. So that's where we come in. That's where SARA comes in. By the way, I'm not a manager at SARA. I'm just a board member council. So that's what SARA does. And then other concrete examples, when our parliament caught fire early this year, SARA was called upon to do an assessment from a heritage perspective so that we could give an account of how the damage is, what the damage is, how can restoration work do. That's what SARA does, because we are also a certification agency that makes sure that any damage or any work that is done of heritage nature, especially on declared sites, we have a say on that. Now in that complexity, we are a society that is still in transition, and a society which is still going through some healing processes. So those dynamics of Voortrekker Monument and Freedom Park express themselves in other monuments and other experiences that characterize our work. So we're trying to find, through those consultations, what qualities are exceptional and speak to our universal values as a nation, which is going through a democratic value system. We have to embrace the experiences of our people, because that culture has been marginalized, has been ignored, and in fact has been silenced over centuries. So our work seeks to bring that back and identify those sites and make them sites that people can be proud of and be able to associate with them in a positive way, not in a contested way. But there's got to be contestation first before we actually get there. Now, I won't go very deep into how sensitive culture and heritage is in South Africa, but I definitely do want to speak about the importance of creating cohesion. I think it's been mentioned also that museums play a big role in transforming societies as knowledge institutions, as places where people go to seek some kind of influence, identity, and belonging. But in reality, a country like South Africa, which is diverse and with its own complexities, is also not unique. All the countries where the fellows come from, I would believe, have got their own complexities. We are not the only ones that face them. And I think one of the benefits and my joys in being part of the Museums Lab is being able to engage at a level whereby I get out of my South African skin and look at these issues from the perspective of what is the international discourse saying? What are the different countries from the continent saying? Some of them I've visited, some of them I still wish to visit, but the kind of exchange that the Museums Lab is bringing is an exchange that has not been present in South Africa and in the continent between African countries. So in fact, the fact that Module 3 is happening in Cape Town, South Africa, which is in the African continent, I think is the beginning of what should be happening, where these discussions should not be happening in Europe and everywhere. They must come here. Because whilst Tolstoy has interpreted colonialism, we Africans are living it. And it is here where you're going to get the real interpretation of colonialism. And of course, we are world people. We engage at an international level, Dr. Gergen, but we live the experience. And when you come here and you talk to us, you're going to hear other stories, maybe different to Tolstoy, or maybe the same, I don't know. So we are very wearing now the hat of a participant in the Museums Lab, as an architect, as an activist, as a kind of a little academic. I'm not so academic. I do think that we need to have this discussion so that we can enrich each other with our experiences. And I think for those who perhaps don't know much about Museums Lab, cooperation, partnerships is the way we're going to go through these complexities, I believe, from my perspective. So I just want to quote, as part of this discourse, a Canadian PhD candidate, Umrin Buchan. She's a a PhD candidate in social and political thought in New York University, Canada. She wrote in the conversation just recently that there is this wave which is underway currently. And in fact, this wave, Dr. Gergen, is not only in Europe, it's in the Americas as well. And she writes that this wave is underway in North American museums, whereby galleries are re-evaluating their own places and roles in colonial history and in the discourse. She writes that museums have historically been recognized as authorities of knowledge and truth. They tell the story of nations and can influence and shape societies. But now, the new campaigns are pushing museums in the West in particular to come to terms with their colonial legacies and to return artifacts stolen by imperial powers to their original countries. She reflects the experience of Canada, which I found quite interesting, because we are talking about the plunder of artifacts and cultural heritage from the continent. But North America has actually plundered indigenous cultures of the Americas. And this is not being talked about a lot. So part of the whole movement from the European context, it's European-African. In the Americas, it's American-American, in a sense. So I find this quite interesting. And she says that, one of the key things is the greater consultation with indigenous and local communities. And we must go beyond these nationally constructed narratives of what art is or what good art is, what African art is. And she feels that some of these consultations are actually concessional than inclusive. She reflects that during the Canadian Museum of History's renovation in 2012, Indigenous people were especially consulted about the changes being made to the museum. But these consultations seem to be quite partial and superficial. So she's therefore pleading that museums and all the discussions that we're having should actually take seriously and go deeper in engaging honestly with those who are affected and not patronize them. Greater and more genuine inclusion of indigenous and marginal voices is needed, she says. Inclusions that go beyond politically correct check marks and liberal premises of toleration. I think that we have got to heed these reflections and recognize that structural transformation of institutions of cultural heritage, which involves more diverse staff, is needed, especially in senior and executive positions. In South Africa, we are fortunate in that we've got systems and processes that are pushing the agenda of diversity and inclusion. We are led by a female CEO who's qualified in her own right. But we need to go beyond that and say in the museums themselves, what is happening in there, both here and in Europe and in America and elsewhere. Who leads the museums? Who are the researchers? You as fellows are getting into that space where you are actually going to have to claim that space even more than just coming to museums lab and saying you're learning stuff. You've got to have the objective that you've got to be at the leadership and at the top of the institutions that you're going to be engaging with. It shouldn't be a paternalistic kind of approach because we're developing capacity. That cooperation is about building the skills and the capacity that we can run our own institutions and be able to engage at the international level as best as we can. So in conclusion, I want to say that in our work as heritage practitioners, academics, scholars, and officials, we must ensure that in the discussion around the former colonialized countries and nations, we must engage in a manner that acknowledges the importance of restoring the dignity of people. It was mentioned here. And through their art and heritage, we will be able to see new narratives developing when people get their dignity back. We therefore should commit ourselves to establish new partnerships and cooperation and give meaning to the discourse so that we can take our societies forward with the knowledge that has been brought back. And we must define how we are going to deal with those artifacts when they are back. One of the modules I moderated was dealing with space, culture, and architecture in heritage. Because what is a museum in the African context? Is it a building like Guggenheim Museum? Is it like MoCA? Is it spaces? Is it people that go and experience? And you will find that it's maybe all of that together. And we need to find ways to define how are we going to deal with these artifacts when they are here? How are we going to make those institutions accessible to people and not exclusive enclaves of the wealthy or those who can afford to come to the museums? And this is the challenge we have. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Mpasha. I think you can see we're already starting to get into the thick of things. You know, you're already starting, you know, you'll see the shared passion about what we are going to be discussing in the next 2 weeks. Dr. Mpasha has just given you again a tour into the discussions that are going to also unfold. It hasn't just been about SARA, but it's been really a broader view of things. And I know Professor Rasool is also going to be now really taking a bit of a deep dive, which I hope is not going to be very long because we did promise, and I know we are over time now, we did promise that we want you to interact more, move, relax, and have some entertainment. And I know you're going to spend every unforgettable day with Professor Rasool going forward. So I'm not going to give a long introduction, but please just, I know you remember what he does here as the director of the, the role that he plays in the museums lab and here on campus, especially as the senior director of the African program in Museum and Heritage Studies. But he also directs the Remaking Societies, Remaking Persons Supranational Forum. You can Google more about that. And he's one of the principal investigators of the International Collaborative Research Projects, Action for Restitution to Africa, and Reconnecting Objects, Epistemic Plurality, and Transformative Practices in and Beyond Museum. There's so much more rich information on all of that, and I'm sure he's going to touch on some of these rich texts as we go forward in the next 2 weeks. But for today, it's really just adding a few words of welcome and a little bit of a deep dive into where things are going in the next week. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Prof. Dube. It is such an important occasion for us tonight. I stand here as a very proud, long-standing staff member of the University of the Western Cape. And I do so as I acknowledge the location that we stand on, where many students have struggled against apartheid, and just across the road from us, where our former entrance to the campus was a battleground during the 1980s in the struggles against apartheid. But it is also enormously pleasing to know that in the hands of our rector, Professor Pretorius, in Professor Dube's hands, and in the hands of our other deputy vice chancellors, in the hands of our dean, Khala Khala, and of our other colleagues within the university. Our university has been in good hands. I do so also as I acknowledge all of our colleagues who are present here this evening. Dr. Gergen from the ministry, our colleagues from the Museum Natuurkunde, the HTV, the Goethe Institute, the DAAD, and all of the team that we have gathered together to put Module 3 in place. Dr. Sophie Shaziepen at the back, Susanna, Souza also at the back, Sophia Sanan, but all the colleagues here, our graduate students, Dean Stefanus and Nicola Ann Pretorius from the Department of History. It is our collaborative effort that will make this work a success. But it is appropriate that we conduct Module 3 under the auspices of the University of the Western Cape. Because yes, we have multiple partnerships. Over many years, I was a counselor of the South African Heritage Resources Agency in its first and second iteration. And over the last few years, it's been very invigorating to spar in different meetings with my colleague Luanda Parker, and to also be in meetings on a more regular basis with the leadership of SARA. But you have really come to a laboratory of museum and heritage formation in South Africa, where the very question of what it means to make a democracy through the museum has been our challenge. Not just in a way that museums signal a form of governance, but where potentially a museum offers the possibility of freedom, offers the possibility of emancipation and comradeship, of a critical citizenship, not in the instructed ways that museums have governed society in the past through their classificatory systems, through their colonial nature. We are rethinking what we mean by museum, and the work that we do in Museums Lab is part of this. But this university has given this debate on what the museum means, I think, a special character. And that comes from the peculiarities of the history of this institution that was forged in struggle. An institution that was made in order to be inferior by the apartheid state has refused, and it has become a site of excellence. And that excellence, importantly, relates to how it supported, gave support to an anti-apartheid struggle, and how it remains committed to a struggle against colonialism. So in the Department of History, and through the African program in Museum and Heritage Studies, through all of these partnerships that we do, we understand that this is the work that is needed in order to make a society after colonialism. We understand that those are not overnight struggles. Those are long-term struggles. We live with all the consequences of those multiple colonialisms. They live with us, and we feel those effects and consequences every day. And we have to build our resources to mount that struggle. And one of the important arenas today that is unfolding, that my colleagues have already referred to, is the emerging field of restitution, the work of restitution that is happening in Germany, that is happening as we build African claims and demands, where that restitution is not simply a repatriation. We're not simply talking about geographic relocations. We're not simply talking about matters of law. These are matters of humanity. This is about restitutionary work that we need to do, where the challenges of restitution begin when the return happens. So we have enormous challenges tonight. And those challenges, as Luanda has pointed out, also settle inside of the South African Heritage Resources Agency. Because over the last few years, we have crafted a new national policy on restitution, repatriation of human remains, material culture, artworks, and documentation. We have decided to keep them in a single policy framework because we argue that the ways in which the restitution of human remains and artworks have been divided from each other in European countries is inadequate. We know so much about collecting histories in Germany, in Austria, in South Africa, that tell us that it was the same collectors who assembled the dead and their possessions, that we must not separate those. Right now, the South African Heritage Resources Agency is building the national office, is creating the national office on restitution. And I want to suggest that the establishment of that office and the unfolding of its work is going to be one of our greatest challenges in the field of heritage, because, as Luanda has pointed out, heritage can be a very conservative field, because ultimately it is about preservation, not about transformation. It wants things to remain the same. Like museums have been regulatory institutions so that people would know their place, heritage continues to present itself as largely unresponsive to the demands of the people. And unfortunately, this takes the shape mostly as heritage, as mitigation, something that our architect colleagues would know very well, where they accept the premise of loss, but where heritage comes in to preserve something so that the loss is not total. Here we have an opportunity to undertake a program of restitution guided by a national policy that will be responsive to the demands of the people, that would be proactive, that would build African capacities so that restitution is not only a program of European gift-making, but is a program of building African capacity. Our program through Museums Lab is part of that direction of building African capacity. And we are enormously grateful to the partnership, all of our partnerships that make this possible. And let me end just by saying how proud I am that our university, the University of the Western Cape, has championed this project. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Rasool. I do trust that you, after hearing Professor Rasool and all the other speakers, that you've been truly inspired and are gearing for the next days. I do trust that you will have a very rewarding experience, fellows of the Museums Lab 2022 program, and especially this phase and the core work co-creation projects that you're going to be doing, and that your experience of this visit on the African continent will give an insight into the many possibilities and more opportunities for expanded mutual knowledge exchange and effective networks and collaborative work. As we conclude this whole lineup of speakers, again, I would like to thank our Vice Chancellor and Rector, Professor Pretorius, for coming, and to thank also the deans that are here, and to thank the Minister's office for sending us a very inspiring video clip, and also to thank Dr. Andreas Gergen and his team, and all the partners. I'm not going to count all of you one by one. Dr. Mpatla for being here, and of course, most of all, the organizers for this evening, from both UWC's international office, led by Umesh Bauer and Tracy, that we've worked very closely with, and the institutional advancement led by Professor Anesh Singh and colleagues in that office, Amanda, Hardy. Thank you so much. And of course, to the caterers that are going to be now serving us some food after this, and to the band, the jazz band that we're going to be appreciating, all the music and entertainment that we're going to be appreciating after this. So I wish you a very wonderful stay. And the colleagues in the audiovisual center that have been helping with the video, cameras, everything, the whole setup. Thank you very much. I can read sign language. Colleagues telling me I've forgotten them. And thank you so much. I do hope that you enjoy the rest of your stay in South Africa, in Cape Town, and most of all, that you enjoy this evening and you wake up tomorrow feeling really fit and ready to get going. Thank you.